It's Monday night, which means a brand new episode of Graphic Radio, the show that mixes comics and politics. And we got an interesting episode tonight to take on a topic that's really been in the news for the last couple of weeks and really should have been tackled a long time ago, harassment and specifically harassment in the comics industry. But we're not going to necessarily linger on all of the crap going on. We'll be bringing up the numerous horrible things that have happened in the industry. Instead, I want to do a little bit different of a take on it. We've got a lawyer to join us who will introduce in a little bit to actually answer our questions and probably dive into some of the lingering or the bigger picture stuff that's out there. So this is going to be hopefully more helpful than kicking up the dirt. Joining me as always is my awesome co-host Alana, who set up our awesome guest and has this fantastic suggestion of who can answer our questions. Welcome to the show, Alana.
Hi. Well, I actually used to be on the board of the organization that our guest Paula is one of the leaders of. And, I think that there are a lot of different perspectives that are useful for addressing the sexual harassment and harassment in general crisis in the comics industry. But it seemed like nobody had talked to a lawyer, which is certainly one very valid and useful place to begin some of those conversations, and we're not here to say that like the legal approach is the be all and end all, but it seems like it hasn't even been part of the conversation yet. And we think that there are really amazing lawyers out there who have a lot of ideas and things to contribute to the conversation. So I wanted to bring on Paula to join us.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of part of the thought of tonight. And before I introduce Paula, part of is like, we know a lot of people are talking about these horrible things tons of people are doing, but like even I, as a person standing here, like I don't know what legally I should do. What is HR supposed to do? Like what laws are there? There's a lot of the horrible stories, horror stories, and not so much of like what should be happening. Obviously, not harassing people would be a great start of the what should be happening, but barring that, actually, us blinking and making it all go away, what's the bigger stuff? Big picture of what can actually be done about it. So Paula Brantner is the Senior Advisor to Workplace Fairness after serving as the Executive Director from 2008 to 2016 and Program Director from 2003 to 2007, writing legal content for the Webby-nominated site workplacefairness.org. Go check it out. And developing products for the Fairness's social enterprise program, just 0.1.2.3. Is that the proper thing? In 2016, she founded PB Work Solutions LLC Council and coach workers in toxic workplaces and consult and advise on workplace issues and nonprofit strategy. An employment lawyer for 25 years, Paula has degrees from UC Hastings College of Law and Michigan State University, James Madison College. She's a former coordinator for NetSquare DC and retired DC Roller Girl, which I still need to go check out for like 14 years in DC. She volunteers at the Smithsonian National Zoo and travels around the world to see pandas, which sounds awesome. Welcome to the show, Paula, and thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Brett and Alana. Really happy to be here.
Well, yeah, it's one of those, like, appreciate you coming. Really wish we didn't have to do this episode.
Welcome to
a big question I've got, I think is a smart place to start, is what is the definition of harassment and sexual harassment? Like what is that like legal definition?
Well, sexual harassment started mostly as a legal concept. Certainly for decades, if not centuries, women have been exploited in the workplace. But we started dealing with it as a legal matter in the 1980s. And the legal definition that has evolved is unwanted conduct that is severe or pervasive enough to affect the terms and conditions of employment. It's usually sexual conduct, but you can also have gender-based harassment. You can have race harassment, religious harassment. But what we know as sexual harassment is unwanted sexual conduct of a severe or pervasive nature that affects the terms and conditions of employment.
Okay. It's fairly straightforward. So I'm fairly ignorant of the actual laws out there. Is there national laws? Is it state laws? The combination of things? I've gone through my training in HR and every job I've done, and there's usually a booklet I need to read and something to sign. But I actually don't know what governs all this.
Well, sexual harassment comes under the federal law dealing with discrimination issues, which is Title VII, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And Title VII prohibits sex discrimination and doesn't even mention harassment specifically, but some lawyers and feminists came along in the 70s and said, hey, when women have to put up with this stuff at work and men don't have to put up with it, and a lot of it is to exert power or drive women out of the workplace because of hostility based on their gender, that's a form of discrimination, and the court should recognize that that is a way that women are being discriminated against in the workplace. And the Supreme Court back in 1986 agreed, yes, this is a form of sex discrimination. And since then, we've had obviously a lot of litigation over, what is and what isn't harassment. But, it originally developed under a, fairly heterosexual model of, men who are bosses and women who are subordinates, and they were being harassed because of either, the male boss's attraction to them or, ultimately it's based in power and the ability to coerce certain behavior based on exerting that power over women in the workplace.
So, at least on my end of things, it always seems to be resources are supposed to be the ones that are training you and teaching you, and I know it's always HR that I get my booklet from to sign, and they're the ones that put together or get someone to come speak and train us and all that. So a couple questions on that specifically, because every story that's been coming out, and I realize not everything goes to HR, people don't report everything, but the thing that keeps on my mind is where the hell is HR in all this stuff? So, what is HR's role? What can't they do? What is their responsibility? Because in a lot of these stories that we're hearing, it sounds like HR's job is more to protect the company than the people being harassed.
Well, that's a fairly long and complicated question. But, first...
We have an hour.
First, right. May take most of the hour to answer that one. No, so first you have to have HR, and, a lot of small businesses or startups or, relatively informal workplaces may not even have a dedicated HR department. So if you do, that's good. That's certainly the place to start. And the HR department is supposed to be responsible for promulgating policies and dealing with complaints and all of that. But ultimately, as you said, HR works for the company. They are employed by the company. And a lot of the problem with the approach we've taken to sexual harassment over the last several decades is that employers, instead of focusing on how can we get rid of harassment, how can we stop it, how can we make sure it never happens, they have instead been focused on how can we prevent our liability. Sometimes they want to protect the harasser, sometimes they just living in denial, or, claim that it wasn't brought to their attention. Excuse me. But unfortunately, there are a number of situations where HR has been part of the, the cover-up, the burying the head in the sand, or treating complaints as less than serious or not believing the person who has been targeted for harassment. So, we always have to look at, hopefully HR will be part of the solution in terms of providing a fair and objective complaint process, providing policies that will be enforced. But at the end of the day, they still are have some responsibility to help prevent the company from being sued. And, obviously individual HR departments and HR professionals are going to differ. And, hopefully you have a good one. But, we've seen a lot of instances where that unfortunately has not happened the way it should have.
So if I am harassed, and the reason, to set up on this, I actually saw a couple of people that I know on Facebook post up this scenario. They were harassed. They went and brought it up to their HR team. They kept on saying, okay, we'll deal with it. And then the person who brought that up was canned at some time in the future, a couple weeks later, a month later, and they at that point, mysteriously, they had all these negative performance reports. So, for on the employee end of things, what should they do if they're harassed? What legally should they do? Like, what are their legal rights? Like, what are their kind of their ass sort of thing? Because at least there's one particular scenario where it was so fishy, and it clearly sounded like they doctored some reports and threw it in the file, to get that person out of there, the one who was harassed and put in the complaint. But how do you protect yourself over stuff like that?
Okay. Let's also break that down a little bit because it's, kind of a long and complicated scenario. But I'll start with, can you be retaliated against after you file a complaint? Well, of course, it's against the law. You shouldn't be retaliated against. They shouldn't be papering your file. These things should not mysteriously crop up suddenly after you've been a great employee all along, and suddenly you can do nothing right. But we all know it happens. It happens, and it's why people are scared to speak up, don't feel compelled to do anything, don't have any confidence that their employers will do anything, because, we've seen too many instances of that happening. One unfortunate thing about being a lawyer is the worse things are for the person at work, the better things are sometimes for their legal case. And so there have been cases where they weren't able to prove harassment or discrimination, but they were able to prove retaliation afterwards. Because the company just couldn't help themselves and, did something, in very close proximity to the complaints. And, that was enough to show that, well, even if this person wasn't harassed or we don't think it was serious enough to constitute harassment or discrimination, they clearly jumped in with the intent of squelching that complaint and did take some form of retaliatory action. So, that's what often happens in these cases is that, again, a good HR person will make sure that none of the supervisors or other employees involved do anything that could appear to be retaliatory while the complaint is pending. But if that doesn't happen, then unfortunately people jump in and, they just can't help themselves. They're angry. They don't like being accused of harassment and they're going to do something about it and, try to get this person out. So we see that a lot and, it's better for the legal case but it's definitely a risk that people who complain unfortunately take, even though there are legal protections, that doesn't pay your rent in the meantime. So that's what I have to say about retaliation. You also asked, what do people do when they're harassed? So, we can talk about that as well. The first thing you should do, even before anything ever happens to you, think about this right now. What would you say if someone said something inappropriate to you that made you feel uncomfortable, that was clearly sexual in nature, that it was something that you either knew to be harassment or felt like it was inappropriate and made you uncomfortable? Because what often happens in the moment is that we freeze. We're conditioned to just shut down and
been there.
Not know how to react. And so it's really important to think about in advance, what am I going to say? What would I do if this happened to me? Excuse me. Because in the moment, it will be very hard to do that. So I urge everyone listening now to say, wow, if somebody, you've all heard a story, maybe something's happened to you in the past. What would you say if you had the perfect response ready? So that's the first thing I really urge everybody to do, which will make it more likely that will come out naturally in the moment and, do what you can to nip it in the bud. The next thing you should do is, if there's a way to exit the situation, either, walk away, go to the restroom, go somewhere else, do what you can to extricate yourself. So that, whatever dynamic is happening doesn't continue for very long. And then the next thing you should do after that is start documenting everything. If you've got a smartphone, dictate a note to yourself, take a picture of the room you're in, or, whatever it is you need to do, write down exactly what was said because, later, obviously, it's a very upsetting time, and you might not remember it exactly later. So write it down. If there are others in the room, witnesses, colleagues, or even people who weren't, didn't hear what was said but were there and could verify that, yes, you were there at that point in time and the harasser was there at that point in time, that could be important later. We've seen that the number of the situations that have come out, the ones that are considered to have the most credibility, other people can verify, that they, that these two people were in the room at the same time at this event or, whatever. The next thing is if there's a friendly face in the room, a friendly person, is there anyone around you that you can talk to about what happened? So that, again, the credibility often comes back to, attacking the person being targeted for harassment. And one of the ways that, unfortunately, people have to defend themselves is to say, look, I told so-and-so about this right when it happened. And they could see I was really upset. And, I didn't just make this up out of thin air. This, I talked to somebody, at this point in time, or I posted. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you post on Facebook, but, that has come up in some of the cases recently. So, any way that you can address it right away, talk to somebody right away, write down all the details, and, say something to your harasser right away. Those are the things I would recommend people start with.
Okay. So, because you mentioned telling someone that was there, to kind of get their info down and document stuff. But what happens if someone either feel like they're being harassed, like it's just not something that they don't perceive it as that, or don't want to do anything, but like a third party sees it in that scenario? What should the third party do? Like, do they have any grounds to complain to HR? Like, do they have grounds to speak for the person that they saw being harassed? Obviously they maybe want to bring up and talk to that person, I would think. But, what in that scenario, like what do you think the person should do?
Well, every situation's a little bit different, and some situations are easier to intervene in than others. So, it's hard to come up with hard and fast rules for every single situation. However, one of the things that has been missing from how we deal with sexual harassment is what we call bystander intervention, which is that no one knows how to get involved and how to support the person that's being targeted for harassment. And so nobody says anything, and the person who's being harassed has good reasons not to speak up, and no one else says anything either. And so, these situations go on and are not addressed. So if you witness something that you believe to be harassing, here are just a few things you could do in the situation, and, it'll be up to you to determine what's appropriate. The first is, if you can check in with the person being harassed. Hey, are you okay? Is he bothering you? Did he just say that to you? Demonstrating that you know what's going on, you saw what was going on, or you heard what was going on, and are willing to repeat that back, that, it wasn't something that the person being targeted just dreamt, or, I can't believe he said that. No, he really did say that. So that's the first thing I would do is, if you're in a place where you can approach the person being harassed, and, you're in a position to do so, that's one way that you can show your support. Another way, and this is especially applicable in a group setting like a con or, a happy hour or some kind of group event, is, excuse me, many of those events, and certainly the ones that don't have these, will be starting to establish codes of conduct. And a lot of cons and conferences and events have had problems in large group settings in the past, and so they've developed these codes of conduct to try to prevent this from happening, and there's a protocol to follow. That you agree, if you're going to be participating, that you're not going to harass, but there's also a way to report conduct that occurs while you're on the premises of the event. And so, whenever you attend something, look for that. Or if they don't have one, there's nothing wrong with, when you register or sign in, say, hey, what if something happens? Who would I talk to about this? Just, for your own safety and the safety of your, friends and peers. So, that's another way. You may be able to do it anonymously, or you may be able to do it in a way that doesn't implicate, the employer or anyone else. You can just say, I saw this person say this to that person, and I thought you might want to know about it because I don't think it was appropriate. So those are a couple of solutions right away. If you're in the same workplace, it can be a little bit more challenging, but it's always helpful to identify, who the people you can trust are, what the workplace policy is. Is there a way to report anonymously? If you can't report anonymously, who can you talk to? Do supervisors have an obligation to pass this information along if they hear about it? Just try to identify, what are the complaint mechanisms and who are the people that are responsible in that situation.
One thing that we definitely tell people to do in the labor movement is, as soon as you know that you might be bringing a complaint, or you might be becoming publicly critical of the company or employer that you're working for, is to begin keeping track of your own information privately as much as possible, so that if people do decide to complain about you or your performance, you have a way to document to show that it's manufactured problems. So if you're able to say, look, you can see, this is, if it was at a standard workplace, which comics offices aren't, you would be like, okay, look, I can show you I've been here on time every day. I could show you that these are my evaluations that I had from my manager. But, the thing with comics is, and to be able to demonstrate that your excellent work record on paper and to have that backed up and saved yourself, and to have that readily done before you bring something to management. But definitely one of the challenges that, we have in comics in the industry is that so many of people who are really employees are still regarded as being freelance. And, one of the things that made the Berganza case of he was, an editor, a high-up editor at DC Comics who was harassing people and, in fact, who had brought it up, was that the policy, he was an employee of the organization, and they said that they had penalized him and reprimanded him for violations, but the solution of the organization was to just not have any women work in his office from that point on, so he wouldn't be tempted, basically, which is disgusting. So, and then I wondered if that would be is that a case of workplace discrimination against women? If you're saying that here's an office that will not employ women, even if it's not stated publicly that they won't employ women, is that a different analysis of that situation? You can say, look, you can demonstrate there haven't been many women here, and it happened after this person was disciplined for sexual harassment.
Certainly. The fear is that workplaces are going to overcorrect and segregate male and female employees, and that is so obviously not the solution to this and a form of discrimination on its own. If anything, we should be putting more women in positions of power and not fewer, and not creating more integrated workplaces where the relations between, both sexes is not so fraught because it's not, 90% male or 80% male and just a handful of women trying to, operate in this, overly, or, not overly, but, primarily male environment. So that is, I guess there's certainly a danger that, in an attempt to deal with this issue, that people will do some boneheaded things. And, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's, one of the solutions people try. But if they do, they're opening themselves up for a lawsuit, because you can say, hey, look, I complained about this and then I was cut off. I hit a wall. I could not advance any further in the company. I was never put on any high-level projects because the harasser was the one who was working on all of the top projects that, I never got to work on again. So, that is not a solution. And going back to what you said earlier, I think it's good for every employee. And, you don't want to have to think this way. You think every job is going to be great. And, when you first get a new job, you're really excited. And especially if it's in a competitive industry that you're really trying to break into, you don't want to think something bad's going to happen. But you should all along be saving, any kind of portfolio information, any kind of compliments, kudos that you get, keeping your LinkedIn updated, keeping your resume updated, and, saving copies of anything that shows your performance as an employee, because unfortunately what happens if it becomes a legal and adversarial issue, a lot of the evidence that you might need to prove your case is in the hands of your employer. And they're not going to want to turn it over. They're not going to want to say anything good about you or hear about, any times that your work was complimented or praised or recognized by someone on the outside. So you need to hang on to that along the way, whether, you decide this is not the work environment for you and you want to move on, or you get in a situation like a harassment situation, discrimination situation, and you need to be able to document your performance.
Absolutely. The other thing with that story is that we also, we actually have documented in the news coverage article on BuzzFeed that, one of the victims of harassment who had been an editor said that she wouldn't be okay with working directly for her harasser. And Brett, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, and that and basically said, like, I can't work with this particular person who harassed me. And basically one of the highest people up in the company had said, okay, well, I guess basically just said, okay, then I guess you won't be able to edit anything, and just gave her administrative tasks from there on out. I mean,
yeah, it was kind of generally my take too of the story.
And that's the risk you run. It's certainly understandable why the person being harassed would not want to work with a harasser on an ongoing basis. But some companies are small enough, or the power is concentrated enough, or they're in a particular job where either the harasser needs to be terminated and not work with anyone on the basis of what has happened, or it's just not really possible to have that kind of segregation. Obviously, the larger the company, it may be possible to do that, but in some situations it just may not be, and that's another risk that you will find your career stalling in a job that you're never going to be able to work to the full extent of your talents, because it requires working with this creep, so it's why we need better disciplinary processes and, a commitment to eradicating this kind of conduct and behavior. But you may decide, look, this company culture is so messed up that I'm not going to be able to fix it, or it's not something that I want to take on, and I just need to land in another position. And so, having all of this documentary evidence of what you've accomplished in your job, and other references aside from the person who's harassed you, or a direct supervisor who may also be embroiled in the situation. All of those things are just good strategies regardless of what's happening in your workplace.
Well, I mean, what happened was that every single woman who was part of that is no longer working in the industry. But I have to wonder if the company's decision to say that they are going to protect the harasser is a case of discrimination against women.
That's what I've been wondering.
Well, obviously, one or more of the women involved would need to bring a lawsuit, and the evidence would come out. And we don't know necessarily all the particulars on how that was articulated. Are they all saying, I refuse to work with this person, you need to fire him? And the company said no, or was it just kind of something where they decided for the sake of their careers not to go away, to voluntarily leave their jobs to get into other situations, just because they despaired of anything ever changing? And, a lot of times it's not that clear cut, because certainly the environment causes people to leave and causes people to give up on, trying to change the workplace. But sometimes that's used against you if if you're on record as saying, I resigned, I went out and got a new job, rather than, I stayed until I was fired, or until I had, 8 or 9 incidents of harassment or whatever. I mean, it's a tough line, because, it's hard to stick this out, and the longer you stay, the more abuse you may be subjected to. Whereas, you may find a much more functional employer and a much better situation for your career to thrive. But that doesn't necessarily get at changing the behavior of that company or that harasser.
Well, I mean, I guess the thing is, though, but it's not that people, you don't have to be fired from your job in order to demonstrate that you were that there is a class action against that there might be grounds for class action suit of women against an employer.
Well, there's this concept called constructive termination where you say, I was effectively terminated because I couldn't do my job under these circumstances. I was harassed and the company didn't deal with it, and in order to keep working there, I had to keep working with the person who did this and this and this to me. But those are under the law, relatively difficult to prove, because what they don't want is every disgruntled employee, instead of trying to work out the problems or complain about them, that they all just leave. And so you have to show some evidence that you attempted to complain, you attempted to stick it out, you tried to work with your employer to get these problems resolved, and you only left when it was clear that that was a futile effort. And, the facts of each case will be a little bit different, but that's, generally how it works, is that you have to make some effort to try to fix it. And then if your employer is clearly not going to fix anything at that point, if you move on, it could still be considered constructive termination.
So with the person that's the actual harasser, because in this case, from various reports, it sounds like Warner Brothers and DC has a process that he went and had to sit through another presentation, or take a quiz, that type of stuff. What is the actual responsibility of the employer? When someone is the harasser, is it the type of thing where obviously they could probably just fire you if you're the harasser and just be go through a case and find evidence and stuff like that and then fire you. But this gray area that seems just bizarre to me is, being I've got a complaint against me. I'm just going to keep on taking these courses and trainings over and over and over again. And that being okay, we've dealt with it. How common is that? And it just smells like it kind of kicks the issue down the road and doesn't really do anything.
Well, it often does. And what people also know, it's not like there's any database of harassers. And so, right. You could impose some discipline, say, I'm going to suspend you for a week and you have to watch these videos and, sign some document saying, I promise I'll never do it again. And then, a year from now, you take a job at another company and no one ever knows that, what you did at the prior employer. And so we've seen several instances of serial harassers who just go from one company to the next. And, there was some punishment along the way, but the new employer was not aware of, the conduct and definitely didn't know that they need to, keep an eye on this person. So, that is a particular challenge that we haven't quite solved yet. However, I think there are.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the examples that we did discuss, though, was a case where there had been a whole story that we'd run about how a particular person, Scott Alley over at Dark Horse Comics had had a history of harassing people and had gotten caught doing it. And, there was a news reports about this. And then he got demoted, and he did an apology letter, and he was demoted. And then, a year and a half later, he got hired by a different company. So it's this is somebody who's publicly known as a harasser, and it's not like this is I was saying to Paula, this isn't the Alan Moores of the comics world, the people who are geniuses who will go down in the history books as the greatest creators of the art form. Those are not the people who are getting in trouble doing this. It's mid-range to on talent who are getting in trouble for this. And this company, Image, has just now employed a harasser. Is there any legal liability that a company has if this person then goes on to do other acts of violence against people, in an employment situation? Is it because the incident where he bit somebody was at a conference, which was on work time, right? So if there's some other...
Well, that was going to be my next question, too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk about comp in a minute, but I am curious about like what employer obligations are when like someone was like a known harasser. If there's any kind of like anything that happens, if everybody knows and acknowledges that they're an harasser and they just get hired by another company and then they harass again, like are you able to point to something that the employer did there?
Well, there are some cases in settings like schools, or healthcare settings where people are working with vulnerable populations and they have a history of, a particular type of abuse, such as, child abuse or elder abuse, where there has been, negligent hiring where you were supposed to do a background check and you were supposed to verify this and this and this, and you didn't do your job to do that. That has not yet been well developed in the harassment field, where it's like you hired someone who some people made some complaints about in a completely different setting, but you should have known this person was not capable of, behaving themselves in an office environment. Unfortunately, we like the redemption stories, when people make a tearful apology or they blame substance abuse or, problems with their marriage or, something else going on in their life, which often happens. We want to give them another chance. And I think that's what happens sometimes, from what little I know about the situation you described with Scott Alley, that, probably, he made an apology saying I had a drinking problem and I'm doing this and this and this now in terms of addressing my substance abuse issues, and I want another chance. I think that's I think in the future we will see people more reluctant to hire known harassers, but we hardly know who any of them are until like the last several months. All these, people are coming out of the woodwork that, were only whispered about, if that. So I think now we're going to have a body of a lot more people who there will be media articles about, there'll be, formal public complaints about, and people will have access to that information for their consideration before they hire someone. Let's hope so.
So with the Alley situation, because it's an interesting one in that particular publisher, Image, doesn't have the creators aren't employees. It's not quite like DC where some of the creators are like full-time employees and they've got editors that are full-time employees. Their project, I describe the company as more as like a confederacy, in that there's like this small group of central individuals who do like the bookkeeping and do some marketing and help things get the process of publishing, but the creation and the editing and the coloring and all that, they're all technically like freelancers doing their own thing and then sign a contract with the publisher, which makes things even more interesting in the comic industry, in that a lot of people aren't, I'm doing air quotes, employees in the traditional sense that salary and benefits and all this stuff. They're freelancers. So when it comes to that, like, obviously companies can have in their contracts, trying to think of the proper term, like behavior rules. A buddy of mine who does television does it, where you're expected to behave in a certain way, and if things come out, you can get fired and canned for it. You can do that.
But these called morals clauses?
Moral clause, yeah, that's it. Yep, moral clause, and we always giggle at that, and we're like, you're not moral.
In today's environment.
Uh-huh.
But that's essentially what they are.
Yeah, moral clause. Thank you. Brain fart on my part. With the moral, like beyond the moral clause, what can these companies do to freelancers other than not hiring them?
A lot of not let their employees harass them would be a good start. a lot of industries that employ contractors have a problem, and we see it with the gig economy and companies like Uber and hopefully not Lyft as much, but there are special challenges that apply when you have a large body of independent contractors because you don't have the same protections. Contractors don't have the same protections that employees have. As we've talked about, even the protections that employees have are not necessarily all that great or adequate to deal with the situation. So when you take away what little legal protections there are, it can really be problematic in that you don't know where to go or what to do or if there's any way to address problems like this. So I guess where people need to start right now, and especially people who haven't been harassed or are in positions where their advocacy can help improve conditions for the freelancers and contractors, is put policies in place that say, even though you're not an employee, if you have a complaint about one of our employees or in a situation where you're representing the company, like a professional conference or a con or whatever, that this is what you do. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the conferences have their own codes of conduct. And so if the person harassing you is not, you don't have any, if they're essentially a stranger to you, they work for another company, you may have some remedy through the conference itself. But, we don't have a lot of legal protections, and so it's really important for companies to start adopting those policies and for freelancers to push for those protections. And, there are some advocacy groups like Freelancers Union, who is they're on the front lines trying to advocate for rights of contractors to not be harassed and to get paid on time and not be stiffed by their employers and a lot of abuse that typically happens to contractors. But it's just really important to try to figure out where those gaps are right now and what protections might exist, and to build in more policies and procedures when companies are maybe running scared or know that they could have a problem on their hands.
But what about the contractors? What responsibility does the company have if the freelancer and contractor is the one doing the harassment?
Well, there are some states that there's not a lot. There's not a lot. Contractors are not covered under the federal law, Title VII, that we were discussing earlier. They are covered under some state laws, and so, the first thing to do if you've been harassed would be to talk to an attorney in your area to see if it's something that might be covered under state law. And, depending on the company may have some kind of dispute resolution process that would help you. But like I said, unfortunately, legal protections are pretty sparse, and so we all need to be fighting right now to just get companies to voluntarily police themselves in situations where the law doesn't apply.
Kind of going there, because this is a question I have. You brought up the Freelancer Union, and we went and tweeted out about that. Are there other legal services out there to help employees? They might not know where to go, who to talk to. Are there legal organizations? Are there organizations that kind of deal with the topic that we can point them to?
So one of the challenges with legal services is that a lot of legal services have been really gutted. And so, most legal services are, a fee-for-service basis, which, if you've been fired from your job or you're swinging several freelancing assignments, it may seem unaffordable. But there are attorneys out there who will consult with you, and if they they don't feel they can bring a lawsuit on your behalf, or that the facts as you present them don't add up to give you any legal rights in the situation, often just talking with them for a short period of time, the consultation itself will give you some strategies to move on. So our organization, Workplace Fairness, maintains a list of attorneys nationwide. And so, start with our listing and see, get some names of people you can talk to in your area. Call your state bar associations or local bar associations. Often they have legal referral services. There are some employment law clinics in major cities, including D.C. and San Francisco. Often they're run through law schools, and so you may inquire locally about whether there are clinics in your area. Some of them have very specific income requirements, and so you might not qualify for that. But honestly, it may be worth your while to even pay for a consultation if you can't find someone who will advise you at least for 15 minutes or 30 minutes free of charge.
Cool. Well, I work on that, getting that information out to folks.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we always sort of talk about is, obviously, the law is limited, especially, when you consider the fact that people are risking so much when they do a suit. But it still feels just like that people don't even know, what is even on the table for them. But it looks like a lot of the solutions that ultimately people need to find require, collective action of some sort. If one of the things that I sort of fret over is that a lot of the time the conversation around when there's a problem of discrimination or really anything really messed up happening in comics, it seems like people are either of the standpoint that you should complain, just have a couple of random one-off complaints on social media and then go back to your life as it was, or that you should boycott the company forever. And I think and I'm not against boycotts. I'm for boycotts. But if you're going to have a boycott, you have to have a strategy to win that boycott. Because every time somebody declares a boycott and a company doesn't see any economic target, any economic injury or media injury from you having done so, you're not helping the cause. What's missing in so many of these cases is any sort of collective action where people say, you know what, if I say one thing, it doesn't make a great big difference. But if we all come around, we develop a hashtag that we're going to use together, we're going to make a statement, we'll go to the press, we'll ask for comment from, this person or from this employer, we'll develop a bigger public narrative, we'll have a petition. All these intermediary steps just seem to never get really discussed or even considered as options. And it definitely seems like, if there was someone was going to do some sort of a class action lawsuit, the first step also would be establishing the class of who are the people who would be impacted by this. People coming together is really the first step for, for so much of what we need to have happen.
Well, I think this is a perfect time to mention our friends at coworker.org. They are a nonprofit organization that allows people to file petitions against their employer and to engage in collective action in terms of getting supporters for their cause, whether they're coworkers or fans or, friends and family, to bring people on board and tell them what's going on in a particular company. So they're also a really great resource. If that other people would support you but aren't quite sure about how to bring them on board, a lot of us have been involved in organizing and know about all the steps and know how challenging it is. But, if this is the first time anything like this has ever happened to you, you may not realize all you have to do to fight back effectively. So coworker.org is a great resource for workers trying to figure those steps out.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, there's also like organizations that are organizing pressure campaigns against different corporate targets all the time, including media targets. And I would love to see more collaboration between people who are upset about, bigotry or biased actions or discrimination, connect with organizations that are already addressing systemic problems caused by the parent companies of like lots of these publishers as well.
Well, I think a lot of the problem is a lot of us are in our individual silos, and certainly employers prefer that. If you're focused on what's going on at your company, you may not even be aware of, the dealings with the parent company or where you would go to escalate something. And so the silver lining of all this is, all kinds of things are just coming out of the woodwork, and we're learning so much about the inner workings of some of these companies. And, there are efforts, obviously, to take some of them over with new management and, promises to do much, much better. So, hopefully some good will come out of all of this, especially in cases where, the events happened decades ago and there's not much you can do about it at this point legally. But some of these public outings of what has happened will hopefully lead to positive change.
It's a good question. What is the general, are there time frame for lawsuits and anything like that? I gotta imagine it varies depending on location.
Well, it varies some according to the conduct at issue. Title VII, as we discussed earlier, it's either 180 or 300 days, depending on your state, from the last discriminatory act. So, if it went on for several months, but the last discriminatory act was you were fired on this date, or you were demoted, or something, that was the last instance of harassment, you would have either 180 or 300 days to file a complaint with the EEOC or a state anti-discrimination agency in the states that have them. So that's not a whole lot of time. And, also why I recommend talking to a lawyer right away is that, you've got deadlines and you could miss out entirely on your ability to do anything if you don't file within the applicable time period.
Okay, so that's really short is what I'm hearing. I'm shocked on how short of a time period that is.
And many of these stories
are like... My wife is a lawyer who's staring at me nodding.
Yeah. It's a lot of these conferences you hear about things that happened 5 years ago or, longer, and those are not, legal cases. And one thing that I think is really important with that, we tend to, when we hear these stories of things that happened years ago or decades ago, apply all the same legal standards, like innocent until proven guilty, and, how can they prove that this thing happened? These are never going to be lawsuits. That time has passed. And so what it comes down to is, do we believe the person who courageously comes forward and talks about what happened to them at great risk to themselves and their careers and their lives? Or are we just going to focus on the legalities? And, this is obviously a situation where, due to so many different factors, the legal protections are just not enough.
Mm-hmm. It's different.
I really just want people to think about how there's a whole community of comic supporters here who are really organized, who want to support people. That we want to be able to have people's back, whether that means doing GoFundMes for people, supporting their independent work, when their work for a particular publisher is, threatened because of their discrimination that they've been forced to endure, et cetera, that there is a community of people who will willing to be activated to support you, because we care about the creators and we care about the folks who are working for the companies that make the stuff that we enjoy.
So, I mean, obviously there's the time frame for the harassment lawsuit themselves, but some of this is assault. is that a longer time frame? If you know that info or not.
Well, that becomes a criminal matter, and it would be subject to the criminal laws of individual states. And, a lot of times, obviously, there's matters of degree in terms of, what specifically was touched or assaulted. So it's very hard to generalize, except to say the sooner the better. And especially in the assault realm, there are more resources out there for people who have been assaulted. We have a whole network of, rape crisis centers and sexual assault services for people who have had to deal with that. So, get to those resources as quickly as you are able. You're physically able, you're emotionally able. But if you think there's a chance you want to pursue something, or you need to preserve evidence, or just feel like you did all you could to respond to the situation, then as much as you would probably be inclined to want to, just go somewhere remotely and not talk to anyone ever again, you have to really put yourself out there and avail yourself of the resources that are available as quickly as you can, because unfortunately, this is just a situation where the longer you delay, the less likely it is that anyone's going to be able to do something to help.
If there was, for you as an outside observer, like, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make when they're harassed? Not, and I'm to like maybe hurt their cause or maybe not get the right result. And like, if there was one piece of advice you could give to people who have been harassed, what would you tell them to focus on, and what advice would you give?
I think I would go back to what I said earlier. Know how you're going to respond before it happens. And when it happens, record as much information about it as you can, as quickly and immediately and in as much detail as you can. Again, don't run away from it. Deny that it happened. Just write down everything, talk to everyone you can, make a record at the time, because unfortunately we have a system that, the longer you wait to do anything, the more likely it is it will happen again to you or to someone else, and the more likely it is that your reaction will be questioned, and that's not right, but that's unfortunately what we've seen time and time again.
Fair. Good advice. Very, very. Are there statistics as to like how much harassment happens in the workplace?
The best place to go for the current round of statistics is the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission at eeoc.gov. I'm terrible at remembering numbers, so I don't want to give you a bunch of numbers that turn out not to be
I'm looking
current.
right now.
But we know it's very prevalent, and what we saw from Me Too recently is that everyone has a story. It seems like there are very few people who haven't had something happen to them. And while we know that there are definitely some, predators and repeat offenders out there, people who have, a more serious problem, there are some people that, have offended, have harassed, and, may not even realize that their conduct made someone uncomfortable. And so, another good thing about talking about all of this is people who don't ever want to be in the situation of having harassed someone are examining their behavior very closely and looking at, mistakes they've made along the way, and hopefully, conforming their behavior to do better in the future, to be better managers and better coworkers and better supporters of those who have been targeted for harassment.
Thank you very much, Paula. Yeah.
I am contemplating a hell of a lot, and I learned a lot. I don't, yeah. Very helpful.
Well, it's such a huge thing right now. There's so many pieces, and it's obviously a very complex problem that, we really, we spent decades on, and we're not where we should be in terms of solving it, but hopefully some of the attention we're focusing on it right now will make a real difference.
Have you seen as an organization an uptick? I don't want you to give away metrics or anything like that. Has there been more? Are you seeing more as an organization, like people coming to you and talking to you now? These last feels like 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks.
Well, the phone is ringing off the hook for these kinds of things, media, radio, television, and mainstream press articles. So it's something that, people are really looking for concrete, helpful information. And we have several pages on our website dedicated to sexual harassment issues, and they are getting, much higher traffic than, they were always among the more popular pages of our site, but, they're really seeing a lot of traffic these days. So yeah, it's something that everybody is talking about and thinking about, and hopefully the right people are talking about it and thinking about it. But I don't expect it's going to go away anytime soon, because it's an issue that has been there for decades, and hopefully with this current focus, we can, kind of wrap our heads around it a little bit and come up with some solutions that work better than the ones we've had.
As we're kind of wrapping up, we had you on for a while now. Is there anything going on, like legislatively, that people might partake, help kind of push through?
Well, I haven't seen much yet. What I've seen legislatively is that legislatures are scrambling to do trainings. Congress, state legislatures, and they have particular problems as well. Many of them have what I call the fox in the henhouse problem, where the people doing the investigating of the complaints are peers of the person who is the harasser, and so there's just an incentive to protect your own, and so some of the processes that are set up to deal with this are just not effective. I think some of the things we will see, though, in the days ahead will be requiring more training. There may be some proposals to deal with the freelancer issue that we talked about, to provide more protections to people who don't have employee-based protections. There may be some efforts to reduce the number of employees to be eligible for protection. 15 is the federal standard under Title VII. Some states have significantly lower numbers than 15.
How many people are in the company? What number? What's that number?
Yeah, how many people in the company? There's some states that have as low as if you are the only employee, but you're being harassed by the owner, that you could file a lawsuit under state law, even though you wouldn't have the 15 to file a lawsuit under federal law. So I think we may see more of that, because there's a particular problem in small workplaces with, you can't get away from the harasser. You can't do your job without interacting with the harasser, and many of them are family owned or are, you work directly with the owner of the company, and so there's no complaint process, there's no HR, there's really nothing you can do in that situation. So I imagine we'll be taking some looks at that. I haven't seen a lot yet, but, it takes time for these things to filter down, and usually it happens in the state first, and, a lot of state legislatures are not going to be in session until the beginning of the year.
Yes, it's true. I work in politics. Sure, probably thought about that.
Yeah, well, I imagine everybody would be scrambling to say they're doing something.
Yeah.
But it's what Congress is scrambling to do is to say we're going to require sexual harassment training for everyone, and I don't expect with the current environment we have, especially if we have to deal with Senator Roy Moore, that Congress is really going to do much of anything anytime soon that makes a significant impact. But I do feel like some states are going to take a look at what they have and try to see where they can make improvements.
So the Congress thing, I worked on the Hill for 2.5 years. I swear I went through harassment training at least twice in the 2.5 years, and maybe it's just
you work
like
for Democrats. I mean, they might not be good in practice, but they're good on paper. You know what I mean? Like a Democratic office is going to just be just as sexually harassing as a Republican one, but the Democratic one is more likely to make you go through a performance of having some sort of training.
Yeah, I was thinking,
my understanding is it's at their discretion. So, it would be up to the individual member's office.
We had ethics
which
training.
Which could change in the light of what's happening.
Yeah, and I was about to say, I'm positive it was probably our office manager that had us go through it all. And it's not necessarily a bad to go through it. It was always interesting.
I do want to give a plug, actually, that there's a really cool new couple of workplace trainings that are being offered by Jill Rainey, who some of us know from movement stuff. They have a practice that's called Practice Makes Progress, and they do a training that's called the non-embarrassing anti-sexual harassment training for your workplace. And if I were an employer, that would definitely be who I'd be going to get to do a training. I think that a lot of people have a lot of non-helpful. Jill Rainey. I'll send you their information on Twitter in a sec. They also have one on gender fender benders, as they put it, which is sort of a good training on being a more trans supportive office, particularly for folks who want to do a good job of this, and know that something that's important, but don't have necessarily this. This is all stuff that folks are learning how to be better coworkers and better allies and do a better job of tackling. So definitely go follow them. Let me see what's their Twitter account. I know that Practice Makes Progress is the name of their practice. So on Twitter it is at Practice PRGRESS.
Oh, you're going to have to tweet that one, and I'll just retweet it.
I'll totally do that.
I am now doing sexual harassment.
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm now doing sexual harassment trainings through my company, PD Work Solutions, and so I'd be happy to talk to any of your listeners about, what might be needed at their company or how to work with them individually if they are encountering a hostile work environment, harassing environment.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great, Paula. Thank you.
Cool. We will go and tweet that up so people can find you as well.
Terrific.
So, we're over an hour. I'd like to give our guests chances to plug stuff. Obviously, you that you just mentioned. So kind of the platform is yours to throw up resources maybe people should check out, where people can find you online, your company, all that stuff, your organization.
Sure. Well, I as mentioned earlier, I work as a senior advisor to Workplace Fairness, and Workplace Fairness is a nonprofit that provides legal information about your workplace rights and the latest what's happening in the world of employment law and workplace development. And so at workplacefairness.org, you will find hundreds of pages of FAQs of, about every employment law topic imaginable and the law of all 50 states. So you can figure out what might be applicable to you in your state. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a database of employment attorneys who represent workers in employment disputes. So if you think you might need to talk to a lawyer, here's where you can find a lawyer in your area. All of Workplace Fairness's services are free of charge. They're on our website, available 24/7, 365. So it's really the first place you want to go if anything bad happens at work, whether it's harassment or anything else, just to get your bearings and figure out what to do next. And I consult with Workplace Fairness after having been an employee of the organization for over 15 years. And I've started my company, PB Work Solutions, and you can email me at pbworksolutions@gmail.com. And I have a website, but, I have to do more development, kind of just getting some of the sexual harassment work off the ground in light of the great need of what's happening right now. But if you want to email me, or I'm on Twitter you can DM me at @pbrantner. I'd be happy to discuss your situation.
Awesome. Thank you, Paula. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And I'm going to tweet up your website now so people can find it. But thank you so much for joining. Like, this has been very useful, and hopefully, some of the folks out there in the comics land will find it so useful. And it's kind of amazing how little so many know. I mean, I learned tons of this. Can't really say anything. Much appreciated.
Well, happy to help. Been doing this for a long time, and while it's very upsetting to see all the harassment that has gone on and continues to go on, I'm very excited about this watershed moment, and optimistic that we'll see some positive change come from it.
Yes, I hope so. It'd be a good thing. Yeah. But again, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And don't take this the wrong way. I hope we never have to talk about this again.
Well, I can talk about all sorts of other subjects, but yes, I would agree. There's a saying amongst employment lawyers is that we'd love to put ourselves out of business.
Yeah.
But it's unlikely to ever happen.
So, yeah, unfortunately. Again, thank you so much. And our guests can go find you at the website, read up the website, the organization, Twitter, everything. Go take advantage. We've got tons of resources here. So thanks for joining us so much.
It was my pleasure.
Have a great week, and have a good Thanksgiving to everyone.
Yes.
And if you missed the beginning of this episode, you can find it. You'll be able to listen to us on our iTunes at Graphic Policy very shortly. Yep,
as well as Stitcher. And it'll
SoundCloud.
Be on SoundCloud tomorrow, and it'll be on our website tomorrow, and it'll be up on YouTube on Saturdays. I'm putting our podcast on there,
excellent.
so you can go check it out which has been a very interesting experiment.
And I will be on Twitter at all times, as always, at ELANA_Brooklyn.
Yeah, and you can, of course, find us on Graphic Policy on the website, graphicpolicy.com, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, all at Graphic Policy. Really nice and consistent. Again, so this has been an awesome episode. I'm so happy that so much information came out of this. Please, people, like, share this around. Use this as a resource. I think this is an under-focused area in the industry. So we've got tons of resources out there, and then in the archive on our site, I will do my best to collect a lot of the various links and organizations that we mentioned and get them there as a nice, like, archived place you can go find it. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Brett.
I'm Ilana.
Keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.